most organisations within them have moments of greatness, moments of, you know, being able to do it well.
Yeah.
And if you have a look at any operation, you'll see that, you know, there are bad days and there are really good days. And the really good days, although not as many as you'd like to have, often exceed the expectation, the performance requirements that are set by the organisation.
Yeah.
So, you know, ironically, the benchmarks are internal.
Yeah.
And it's on a system that is relevant for them. As soon as you start talking benchmarks, there's all this debate about, you know, what are they doing in a different geology, and it's a different, you know, nation, it's different tax structures, it's different motivations. Whereas if you're looking at your own operation, you've got this big variation.
Yeah.
The answer is simple. We want this, not this, if this is the good bit.
Yeah.
And so how do we get it? Well, we know what bad, let's look at what bad is. Let's understand what good is, and what's the bit that's going to get us from one to the other. It's not so hard to do.
Yeah. What's the time frame and duration to make this kind of shift? Like if an organisation said, look, we do want to make a transition from that to a different way of approaching it, this more end-to-end, what time frame would you say would be reasonable to have more of a collaborative end-to-end view of, you know, what you do?
To me, I mean, there's a couple of elements to that. The first one is you can start the process anytime. It doesn't take much effort. You know, ideally you'd want to start the process prior to your yearly planning cycle, so that you can get another, you know, new pipeline of projects going through. So you know, that would be probably the first thing. But in terms of delivery of the outcome of this, you know, a lot of the projects can be done in a very short space and time. So you know, you don't need long lead times to deliver projects. Yeah. But the critical thing is this is a cyclic, you know, this needs to be a cyclic sort of endeavour. So as you're completing one level of projects, you probably should be looking at doing another run through and an analysis, you know, continual analysis on the business to start to identify the other emerging projects. Because when you solve one area, something else starts to pop up. And often in the way that we capture data, which is what we rely on to identify some of the areas that we need to work on, what tends to happen is some data masks other activities that are going on, but because it's the bigger one we focus on. As soon as you get rid of that, another one pops up. So you need to be vigilant. It needs to be a constant process, if that answers the question.
What would be the one thing that let's say we're talking to a business lead, a business improvement leader, someone in the improvement space, not necessarily the business leader. What would be one thing that they could do today that's going to move them in the right direction, whether it be to implement this kind of thinking or to influence the way people approach this?
I think, look, if I was in that role, what I would do is have a look at all the projects, and this is what I advise clients anyway, when I follow in, is have a look at all the projects that are currently, you know, in the space. Identify what is the metric that project is trying to address, to fix. Have a look at the performance over, you know, the last 12 months, 6 months. There's a couple of, I guess, aspects to that, but generally say 6 months. Have a look at the performance, both from an average and a variation point of view. You know, how do they vary over that period of time? And then evaluate those projects against, you know, what needs to be done as a priority and what won't even affect the throughput that we're dealing with.
How do they know? So they know if it's a project not worth putting energy to at the moment. If there's an initiative overload, they know it's one that should be parked for a while if it's not going to affect
the outcome,
the desired outcome, which is the bigger picture metric.
Absolutely. And it's all got to be linked back to that. You know, as we said earlier, it's not for every endeavour in an organisation. Clearly they've got some social and human responsibilities.
Do they need to take into consideration their constraints in the business? Because someone in the pit, you know, upstream would argue that if I increase throughput or tonnages or cubic metres of gas or whatever it might be that they're moving, if I increase that, it affects throughput.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I mean, that activity is done in light of understanding the you know, end-to-end supply chain or end-to-end value chain, and knowing that, for instance, you know, this area here, for instance, this functional area here is the one that's been causing us the limitation in us being able to make more product. some more throughput.
Here's a thought just come to mind is what do you think of the idea that the benchmark that they're targeting, if we use their terminology, benchmark, is the metric that if they hit it, it optimises that balance through the value stream.
Yeah, no,
like they're kind of in sync with the constraint.
Yeah, no, look,
Because anything more than that's waste.
absolutely, that's right. And you know, there's the methodologies that, you know, we use and they've been out there forever are really trying to focus, you know, effort and energy in that space. However, there's this big challenge, you know, we've got to make more tons, we've got to, well, it seems like, you know,
the right intent, but
busy,
not necessarily the right thing.
And you know, senior leaders today have a huge responsibility in making sure that resources, scarce resources, are deployed correctly.
You know, maybe we're rewriting the rules. Maybe benchmarking is this. The external benchmark only applies to the constraint. The non-constrained areas, right, their benchmark is the constraint itself.
Yeah.
They got to. So we got to move one. We got to get the constraint sorted and optimize everything to match whatever it might be.
Absolutely. Yeah. Look, it's not rocket science.
No.
It's not rocket science.